I'm Ashley Cooley, a birth, baby, and sleep educator and mom of 3. There's so much information out there, isn't there? This show is dedicated to helping you clear out the noise so you can figure out what will work best for your baby and your family. Having worked with countless families over the years, including my own, the information and strategies I'll share are based on these experiences, my extensive training, and we're even going to back it all up with some science. Because it's all about making informed decisions, and we're here to break down what it takes to raise well-adjusted, securely attached, and happy babies. If you're looking to learn more about your baby, gain more confidence in your parenting, and get as much sleep as you can through it all, you've come to the right place. Bringing up baby is about to get a little easier. I'm not going to spend too much time telling you about this episode because you just need to listen to it. But not too long ago, I had the amazing opportunity to catch up with Wendy McCallum. Wendy is a professional coach and corporate wellness expert and the host of the Bite-Sized Balance podcast. Wendy teaches busy professionals, many of whom are approaching burnout, how to reclaim time for themselves, reduce stress, build healthier habits, and increase their daily joy in the process. She's also a certified naked mind alcohol coach who helps clients find freedom from alcohol and other unhealthy coping habits. As a coach and corporate wellness expert, Wendy speaks with honesty and empathy and has helped hundreds of people cultivate healthier habits and coping mechanisms. She supports her private clients in preventing and recovering from burnout and establishing a healthier, more satisfying work-life balance. Wendy and I had the best conversation, and we tied our discussions around burnout and balance as they pertain to the busy lifestyles we have as parents and caregivers. But I do want to say that the line between burnout and something like postpartum depression can be a little gray. So if you're feeling like maybe this could be something more, then you should absolutely make an appointment and talk to your doctor. Or better yet, if you're not even sure, just check on it anyway. Trust me, it's worth it. Now, normally I do a mental health minute at the end of each episode where we tie in our topic and relate it to our mental health. But well, this entire episode is a mental health minute. Actually, it's more like an hour, so definitely longer than my other episodes, but there was no way I was going to break up this conversation and have you miss anything. But by the end of it, I bet you're going to really feel empowered to bump up your own mental health a couple more notches. After listening to this episode, I'd love it if you'd share what resonated most with you. Send me an email to ashley@birthbabysleep.ca or tag me in a social media post at birthbabysleep. There's something for everyone here, so let's dive in. So Wendy, I'd love to hear about your definition of burnout and how that might differ from someone, say, experiencing a stressful period in their life or something like that. What is burnout and how could we recognize it as burnout?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ashley. It's basically acute stress that continues for a chronic period, if that makes sense. So it's kind of the combination. It's like high stress that goes on for longer than it's supposed to go on. Now, there is actually a definition of burnout that's been presented by the World Health Organization. So a few years ago, there was actually burnout actually became kind of an actual phenomenon. So it's not a diagnosis per se yet at this point, but it is defined by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. And the way they define it is they say it's a syndrome that's conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And then they say it's characterized by energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to the job, or reduced professional efficacy. Now, we're not talking about just occupational burnout today on this podcast. We're talking about burnout, period. And I, in my own practice, have seen burnout many, many times, and I've experienced it myself. And what I see most often is burnout as a result of a combination of caregiver stress and job stress. Now, it can also arise, though, with just caregiver stress, and it can arise with just occupational stress, if that makes sense. So the World Health Organization definition is really focused on the job side of burnout, but I am focused more on burnout, however it arises for women. And when we're talking about burnout, I don't know how helpful that definition is, to be honest. I always say that burnout is really like when you're overwhelmed, wiped out, disconnected, and disenchanted. That's kind of the simplest way to define it. And there are a number of signs of burnout. And I think that this is probably the more helpful way for people to figure out where they are on the burnout spectrum, is to start looking at some of the more common signs or symptoms of burnout, and then asking themselves, do I have any of these? So I'll go through them if you'd like, Ashley, and
yes, that'd be great.
Describe them. Okay, so the first major sign of burnout is exhaustion. So that's almost always present, and it's usually a combination of physical exhaustion and mental exhaustion. The other thing that we see is an attitude shift. So people will often say to me, I used to be this glass half full person, and now I'm kind of more of a glass half empty person. And I just feel cynical and pessimistic, where I used to be kind of positive and optimistic. If you are working, we see decreased work performance. So decrease in productivity generally comes along with burnout, and a decreased ability to focus. So it just becomes more difficult to focus on tasks at hand. Being preoccupied by work when you're not there. So I think this also spills over into caregiving, though. So being preoccupied with caregiving when you're not caregiving. So when I think back to my own story around burnout, I was constantly thinking about work when I was home with my kids, and when I was at work, had a really hard time not thinking about my duties as a caregiver. So I had a list by my bedside table at home that I would use in the middle of the night. I'd wake up and there was a notepad there, and I could write down things about work files that I had forgotten about, or that I was worried about like missing. And then I had a list on my desk at work that was all of my childcare responsibilities. So who needed an immunization, and, who needed a new pair of rain boots. And I had a list going on my desk at work. So I think the inability basically to shut off the source of the stress when you're away from the stress is one of those signs of burnout. An increased reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms is really common in burnout. So unhealthy coping mechanisms can come in very different forms, but for most of the women that I work with, it shows up as an increased reliance on food, alcohol, social media, shopping. Those are kind of the four most common ones that I see. Just a tool to try to escape, basically. So when we are in burnout or approaching burnout, we tend to be relying on those things more often. Oftentimes with burnout, we also see friction in personal relationships. So your work relationships can suffer. So the way that you relate to your coworkers can become more strained and difficult, but also your relationships at home with your family can also suffer. And this one is probably the most common one that I hear people, I work mostly with women, but the women who come to me worried that they are either in burnout or approaching burnout will say, I don't get it. My life looks great on paper. I have all the things. Like, I've been working so hard to create this life for myself. I have a great partner, I have a great career, I have the family I've always wanted, I have financial security, I have a lovely home, but I still feel like something is missing. So just this general undercurrent of dissatisfaction, feeling like there's a hole there that somehow needs to be filled. And again, that's where those coping mechanisms come in, because we often try to fill that hole with some of those unhealthy tools. And then, unfortunately, the last sign of burnout, when burnout progresses, because if you don't address burnout, it will become worse and worse and worse. That is the danger of burnout. You really have to consciously choose to make changes in order to come out of a burnout. And if we leave burnout, the causes of burnout unchecked eventually will lead to physical problems. So eventually you'll see some health consequences, which might come in the form of obesity, depression, high blood pressure. And then, of course, there are lots of increased risks as a result of those things. So that's kind of those are the signs of burnout. And I usually use those as a more helpful guide when I'm talking to women about burnout. And if anyone's listening to this podcast and they are concerned that they might be getting burnt out, there's a free checklist that you can download off of my website. That's just a good tool, just kind of lists some of those things I just talked about that you can go through. Now, I always say this, if you're going through that burnout checklist and you're only checking off some of them and not all of them, I would say, pay attention to how many of them you're checking off. If you're going through it and it's like, yep, got that, don't have that, got that. I mean, that's probably a sign in itself that something has to change, because none of these signs are great. They're not positive things that we want to have. And I'm such a fan of prevention. And so if you go through the burnout checklist and you see a bunch of these things, please think about incorporating some of the tools that I'm sure you and I are going to talk about today on this podcast to try to prevent full burnout, and definitely to try to prevent that eventual physical consequence that happens as a result of it.
that's certainly where I come from too, Wendy. My background is in health promotion, and it's all about prevention of, at any stage. And so I think having you on, and obviously my show is about babies, bringing up babies. So I feel like having you on can really help a lot of the families, a lot of the parents, the moms that might not even be in burnout and hopefully never will be, but it's really just how can we prevent this from happening, or how can we recognize it soon or early so that we can work at trying to make sure that it doesn't worsen, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. That's the key. And I would say with my own burnout, it started when I had babies. So, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. And I was excited that you asked me to talk about this topic, because I think prevention starts with awareness always. And in my own story, my burnout really took flight when I had my two kids.
Would you tell us about your story? I'd love to hear you explain kind of how that all went down. When you did have your kids.
Yeah, sure. So I've been coaching now for over 10 years. And I am a burnout and balance coach with a side dish of what I call alcohol coaching. So I help women who are gray area drinkers for whom alcohol's become a little more present in their life than they would like it to be. But before I started coaching, I was a lawyer. So I had a 12-year law career. I went to school at Dalhousie University here in Halifax, and then moved out to Calgary, got a job with a really great firm, large corporate commercial firm, and did corporate litigation for 12 years. The first 7 years of that, I didn't have any kids. But at 7 years, that is when, at the time anyway, I became eligible for partnership. And the story is just it's the perfect storm for burnout in terms of the timing of things. What happened was I had been trying to conceive for a few years. We had a couple of pregnancy losses, which in itself was stress. So I was going into this with a significant amount of chronic stress, because infertility, as I'm sure there are many of your listeners who have been struggling with some form of that, or pregnancy loss, is highly stressful for women. So I was already in that kind of fight or flight, stressed out state. We had decided that we would try to adopt, and we were on the list waiting for hopefully a match through private adoption in Alberta. And we got a call. Actually, let me go back. I got pregnant again and discovered I was pregnant on Wednesday. And on Friday, I got a call from the agency to say they had a birth mother who wanted to meet with us. Now, of course, at the time I was like, oh boy, not feeling very confident about the pregnancy because we had already had several losses. And actually just feeling like this is actually the worst possible scenario, because of course I need to let this birth mother know that I'm pregnant. It's totally unfair for me not to do that. So I talked to the agency. I said, look, I'm pregnant. It's really early days. I didn't expect this to happen. Chances are it won't be a successful pregnancy with my history, but I need to tell you that. And I'm sure that this might change the birth mom's mind as to whether she wants to meet with us. And I was absolutely devastated about the timing of all of this, of course. And as luck would have it, long story short, she had always wanted her child to have a sibling. She had a brother when she grew up, and it was really important to her that her child had a sibling. So she was actually really elated that I was pregnant, and really very hopeful that I would actually bring that pregnancy to term so that her child would have a sibling. So it was just written in the stars, I guess. But we ended up adopting a baby boy November 11th. And at that time, I was 9 weeks pregnant with my daughter, who is, of all of my pregnancies, and I've had 5, the only live birth I've ever had. So what happened was I adopted a baby boy November 11th. I was 9 weeks pregnant, and sometime in like the middle of January, maybe. So I was probably at that point just over 3 months pregnant is my guess. I got called into the office and they asked me if I wanted to become partner. And at the time, I don't know whether this is still the case because I've been out of the law world for a while, but at the time there really wasn't an option. You said yes, or you left the firm and worked, in-house somewhere. So I told them I was pregnant. I was on a mat leave with my boy at the time. So I said, look, this is crazy, but I'm pregnant. It looks like I'm probably going to actually have a baby in another, at this point, probably like 5 or 6 months. And so I'll need to take another mat leave. Like, I don't know how this is going to go. And they said, that's okay. We really want you to be a partner. We'll support you in that, which was wonderful. And I did end up having her 7 months later. So I had a baby, made partner, had another baby, and then had to go back to work. And the partnership obligations and responsibilities are significantly greater than the associate responsibilities. So, and I knew, because they were so kind to give me these kind of 2 back-to-back mat leaves, they made it possible for me. They were really flexible. I knew that I needed to give them some time. I couldn't just leave after that. So the decision to accept the partnership came along with the decision to work for several more years, and work hard. And it was in those last 5 years of my career that I really started to burn out. And I had no idea what burnout was. I just had no clue. But when I look at this list of burnout signs now, I had most of them. So I no longer enjoyed my job. I struggled with exhaustion constantly. I, obviously was preoccupied with work when I was at home. I was preoccupied with home when I was at work. I wasn't able to leave anything anywhere. And I was, in my own story, starting to rely on unhealthy coping mechanisms more often. So this is when my story with red wine started, really, when I started drinking a glass of red wine at the beginning, just a glass of red wine a couple times a week to relax. And that eventually led, to me, maybe 10 years later, 7 years later, I'm not sure how long it was, just making the decision that that relationship no longer served me. And I haven't had a drink for 3 years now. But that's kind of my burnout story in a really really condensed way. I ended up leaving my job after the 5th year, around the 5th year of partnership. I left the firm. I left law altogether. I knew it wasn't the right thing for me. I didn't love what I did. So that was contributing to the burnout too. I never loved it, never felt like the right career for me. And then we moved from Calgary back to Nova Scotia. And I took an entire year off to try to recover from that burnout. I needed a year to figure out what I wanted to do, but also physically and emotionally and mentally, just to recover from that 12-year period.
I was going to ask how did you recover? So it was taking some time off entirely and really just giving yourself that grace that you needed to kind of come out the other side.
Yeah, I needed to figure out how to not be chronically busy. That was a big adjustment for me. One of the reasons I was so burnt out is because I was trying to do way too much stuff. And I think we'll talk about some of this today. I mean, I learned a lot of lessons from my own burnout. And that's one of the reasons why I specialize in burnout now as a professional coach, is because it is preventable. And there are strategies that you can use to prevent it. But there is also an awareness piece and a mindfulness piece that needs to go along with it that is missing for most really busy, overwhelmed women. No one ever tells us that it's okay to set boundaries. No one ever tells us that it's not okay to never have time for yourself, and that should be a red flag. So I learned a lot of lessons in that year, and I did not recover from that burnout in a year, by the way. I took a year off. I stayed home with my kids when they were 4. They started kindergarten the next year, and I went back to school, did my first certification, which was in natural nutrition. And from there, decided to start a coaching business. But it took me years to fully recover. And I would say I'm still a work in progress. I mean, I'm still growing as a human being and figuring out, what I need. And I say this all the time when I'm working with women: balance isn't something that you just find and then have for the rest of your life. It's an active thing. It requires constant work and shifting, because as your life changes, you need different things. So I'm always working on balance. And I'll be working on my balance probably till I die.
Yeah, as we all should. As a mom myself of 3 young kids, I'm told often when I'm out with them, "Whoa, you must be busy. You're so busy." Of course, my husband gets different comments when he's out with them. And it's kind of all around like, "Oh, look at you. That's so great. You're with your kids and that must be fun." And for me, it's like this, "Oh no, you're busy." And so, but I think that kind of message is put on a lot of moms specifically a lot of times, but parents still in general, of course, when you have young kids, whether it's just one or more than one, we just assume well, this is just part of it. This is part of having young kids, is we're busy, we're constantly busy, we're always trying to juggle all the things. And so burnout, I feel, can happen really easily, really quickly. We're all consumed when a baby comes into our lives and just taking care of this human and learning all the things we are learning along the way. But parents, and especially moms, I find, can really get lost in that. So what would be some ways that we could start looking at, okay, how do we make some self-care, some things put into our day so we could try to prevent these things from happening?
Really, I think the key is there are a bunch of different pieces to this puzzle, Ashley. It's not a simple answer. And so I could talk about this for hours, but I think we need to set realistic expectations for ourselves. I think that's probably the number one thing. I think we need to get out of this comparison culture that we find ourselves in around parenting and ask ourselves, like, what really matters to me? Like, as a parent, what really matters to me? What's kind of non-negotiable for me? What do I want to be able to say when I look back on this period of time in my life that I did that mattered? As opposed to doing all the things because other people are doing the things or because someone else is telling you you need to do the things. Because we can't do all the things and stay well. We can't.
Yeah.
We cannot be the best lawyer, the best mother, the best partner, the best sister, the best daughter. We can't do all of that at once. And some people get mad at me when I say that, but I'm a firm believer in that. We cannot have it all at the same time as women. I wish we could, but it's not possible. And I think we need to get really clear what we actually need and want in the particular stage of life that we're in, and focus on that and forget about some of the other stuff. And I think, for many women that I see now, this is such a key piece of their own burnout. It plays out in all aspects of parenting. I mean, I don't have young kids anymore. My kids are 17 and 16 now. So I'm out of it, but I see it on social media. For example, I see it all over the place. This share and compare mentality of, my kids need to look as lovely as that person's kids. I need to do all of these activities that this person does, who's like, making homemade pizza dough with her 3-year-old. I need to be that person who does that. I think that's probably I would say the number one piece that we need. And that's not easy. You don't just like sit down and make a list of what you need. This is something you need to spend some time reflecting on, probably talking about, doing a little experimenting in your own life. Like what days do I feel great at the end of the day? What days do I go to bed and think, well, that was a really great day? Is it the day where I do like 1,000 things and take my kid to every event and swimming lessons and this and that and the other thing? Or is it the days where we just hang out in our jammies and watch a movie, maybe bake some cookies and go to the park and play on the swings, right? What is it that actually makes me feel good? Because those are the things that make you feel good are not the things that lead to burnout. The things that lead to burnout are the things that don't feel good, the things that feel like obligations, that feel like work, that feel like too much, that feel overwhelming. Those are the things that lead to exhaustion. So I would say getting really clear on what it is that matters to you at this point in your life. And remember, it can change. It's not set in stone. This is all part of that balancing thing. Like it will be different when your kids are teenagers. Trust me. It's not the same what you want, but get clear on that and forget about what everybody else is doing. Just figure out what you want. The most dangerous place that I see this play out, Ashley, is around something we call mummy wine culture. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I'm talking about there, but this is all of the social media. It's largely social media, but it also happens in the media outside of social media. But this idea that alcohol, particularly wine, is necessary for parenting. The normalization of alcohol as part of parenting. I mean, the memes and the posts that are out there are effectively saying like, you need this to parent, and you're not a very good parent. And so therefore you should probably have a glass of wine. The latest example of the latest one that I saw was, it takes a village to raise a child in a vineyard to homeschool, during the course of the pandemic, which is just complete garbage, obviously. But of course you see it and you see that messaging enough and you just start to feel like, oh, everyone's drinking while they're homeschooling. This is what's happening now. We're in the pandemic, everyone's drinking. And that's just one really, I think, very damaging and obvious example of what can happen with social media when we, and same thing happens with other aspects of parenting in terms of what we feel like we should be doing because other people are doing it. So that's a long answer to that question, but I think that's the very first thing that you need to start really getting a handle on. Like, how am I spending my time? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling at the end of the day? And what parts of that are not serving me? I have a mentor called Annie Grace who, uses a system of energy drains and energy gains, which is probably not her system. She probably borrowed it from someone else, but I love it. And I use it in coaching as well. It's this idea of starting to make a list, like what are the things that actually create energy and make me feel good? And what are the things that I do in the course of my week that actually drain energy and make me feel less than? And start getting rid of some of the things that drain your energy if you can. And then this kind of leads into the second point is we need to learn how to say no. Women need to learn how to say no. Moms need to learn how to say no, not just to their kids. You need to learn how to do that with your kids too, but with everybody. You need to learn how to not automatically agree to do everything that everybody asks of you. And I think we have been raised, this is a generalization, but I think women are raised to be polite and to be helpers. And I think it's time that we start really questioning that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a helper? What does it mean to be a caregiver? And we need to start setting some boundaries around that. And the first step in that is learning how to say no more often. Now, when it comes to saying no, I have some tricks around how to make that easier because it's hard. It's hard to say no. Oftentimes, the worst part is when we get caught on the spot, which is what very often happens. So you're actually out somewhere and someone asks you to do something like, hey, do you want to come over to my house after this? Or, do you want to, I've got this fundraiser that I'm organizing for the school. Do you want to help me out with that? And we get caught on the spot. It's really hard for us to say no because it feels like we're going to be rude and offend someone. So I always recommend that we actually think about creating a script, which is something I use a lot in coaching. And it's literally a script. So it's a set of words that you use every time. And you practice them. And the more you use them, the easier it becomes to say them. And they start to feel very natural and flow off of your tongue. So I think that the two components of a script that works for you are it needs to be truthful and it needs to be about you and not feel judgmental or rude in any way. So it needs to feel polite, for lack of a better word. And I would highly recommend if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's me. I say yes to everything. And then I regret and resent half of the stuff I have to do. Develop a script for yourself. Come up with something, and it might be as simple if you're the mom of young kids, it might be as simple as, you know what? I tried to do all this other stuff for a while and it just wasn't working for me. So I'm going to have to say no. Like admitting you can't do it all is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of strength because that is the beginning of setting boundaries. And when you set boundaries around your time, you can actually prevent burnout and you can actually thrive.
I wish more people would say those things, right? Because I think we all think them and we feel them when we're at home alone and might say it to our partners. But there's not enough of that honesty.
In terms of simplifying your life and preventing burnout. I mean, the real solution to burnout is not rocket science. We need to slow down. That's the first thing. So we need to figure out how to just slow down and do a little less. And listen, you're going to be busy as a parent. My 30s were the busiest decade of my life. Unfortunately, I moved into my 40s and I had no plan to make my 40s less busy. And so when I stopped getting busy with my kids, I just filled up that time with other stuff. So I didn't have a lot of these strategies in place. And I think that's another reason why it's so great we're having this conversation now with moms of younger kids. The first thing you need to do though is slow down. And that is, that involves what I was talking about earlier, like having a think, what am I doing with these days? Why at the end of this day, am I thinking to myself, oh my God, I can't wait for this day to be over? If that's how you're feeling, and that is how I felt for a huge portion of my kids' lives. And I look back on that now with regret, not with shame, but with regret. I wish I had made changes earlier, but at the end of most days, I was thinking, let them go to sleep. Please let this be over. Because I was exhausted. And I know there are moms out there listening who feel that way because it's a really common place for women to get to. But if that's how you're feeling, it's really important to start thinking about making changes now because that is the beginning of burnout if you're feeling that way. So slowing down is the first thing. Taking some things out of your life that don't need to be there. That's where this saying no more often thing comes in. That will help to reduce some of the stress that you're under, some of that chronic stress. We need to take some of that stuff off of your plate. You're still going to have stress, and that's okay. We're designed to handle stress. The stress response is actually a self-defense mechanism. It's very essential. If we didn't have it, we'd be in big trouble. It's okay to be stressed sometimes, but what we want to do is we want to start working at eliminating the unnecessary stress. So the stuff that actually is within our control, it's not within your control that you have 3 kids. That's that's the way your life is. And you have to take care of 3 kids every day. But there are always pieces of our lives that are within our control. And usually it's the little things. Usually it's in all the small stuff. So number one thing would be all of the stuff you say yes to that you don't really need to say yes to. Start working on saying no to more of that stuff. That's going to help you to reduce unnecessary stress in your life. And then the third step is you have to start introducing positive coping mechanisms. So self-care, activities that actually give us more of what we need and help us to stay healthy and balanced. So again, it's slowing down, reducing stress, and then introducing a positive coping toolkit. Those are kind of the 3 steps to the burnout, the burnout solution. Start putting a structure in place in your day that allows you to actually get what you need, which frankly is different for everybody, but there are some commonalities there that we can talk about, but get more of what you need into the daytime hours so that you can get what you need at night, which is a really good night's sleep. And that, again, that ties back into this whole like setting boundaries, saying no, because you need to free up some time for some positive stress management activities. So once you have gotten better at saying no, and you've started to take a hard look at like how your day is filled and how many of those activities actually bring you energy and joy and how many of them actually drain you of energy and joy, then you can start pulling in some new activities that will actually support you, make you feel better, and keep you resilient and healthy mentally and physically. So again, the question there, this is really self-care that we're talking about, is what do I actually need? So self-care is not what other people tell you it is. Self-care is what you actually need. And it's different for everybody. So somebody like you, Ashley, with 3 kids at home, you probably need time that is quiet by yourself. Right?
Yeah.
Someone like me, whose kids are 16 and 17, don't really want to talk to her anymore, and who spends her entire day on Zoom calls coaching, or hosting podcasts or whatever, but is never really with other people because I work from a home office and studio. I need to be with people. So I need the opposite of what you do. That's my self-care, is actually connection. And I need to work hard to create that. I need to make sure that I stay connected and feel like I'm in a community, because I am by myself so much, and you are with people all the time, and you probably need the opposite of that. So self-care is very individual based on your circumstances and what you actually need more of. For women who are parenting young children, there are some commonalities, like I said, in there in terms of what women need. I mean, we need time to ourselves. You need some time to yourself. We're not constantly being asked to serve other people's needs. You need to figure out how to make that happen. And if you need to ask for help, that's okay. We need to ask for help with this stuff. This is something I was terrible at with my kids. I mean, I was pregnant with a brand new baby. So my entire pregnancy, I was caring for a newborn, right? And then I had another newborn, and my husband was away all the time. He had a job where he worked in the field. And, at the time, I can't remember how many months into my second mat leave. During my first mat leave, I worked Wednesdays still, which is crazy. So I used to go into the office and work Wednesdays, and I would leave my little baby with my best friend, and she would take care of him. And I would go in and try to manage stuff on these files that I had going at work. And then in my second mat leave, I can't remember when I went back to that, but I started doing, 1 day a week or whatever it was as well. So I was still trying to work and balance these 2 kids and parent them. And I did not ask for help in the way I needed to ask for help. I should have asked for far more help than I asked for. Asking for help is really, really key in this. And that if that's what you need to do in order to carve out some time for yourself, please do it, because it could be the difference between you getting to where I got to or preventing that. For some women, it's exercise. I would say if you don't know what you need more of, go back to the 4 pillars of health as I see them, which are joyful movement or exercise, healthy eating, sleep, and stress management and mental health. So are you moving your body? Maybe it's that. Sometimes I'll say to women, they're trying to figure out, okay, what is it that I need more of? How am I out of balance? And I'll say, well, remember back to the time before you felt this way. What was present in your life then that is no longer present? So what's missing now? And oftentimes it's exercise. So I used to exercise regularly. I'm not doing that anymore. It might be, I used to really pay attention to my food. I used to do food prep on the weekends and try to stay organized with a meal plan. And I haven't been doing that for a long time. for all parents of young children, it's sleep for sure, right? Because our sleep necessarily changes. But I always say to people, look, I use this structure of the 4 pillars of health, like this analogy, for a reason. So it's a metaphor, if you can visualize that you have an old Greek stone temple, and it represents your wellness. And on each corner of the temple, there's a pillar. So again, the 4 pillars are sleep, exercise, healthy eating, and stress management. And those pillars are holding up a stone slab, and the stone slab represents your health and wellness. If one of those pillars is cracked, but the other ones are strong, your roof will remain intact. So we are designed to go through different periods of our life where different pillars are taking a hit, and that's okay. So it's okay that you're sleep deprived because you have a newborn child. It's okay, as long as you're taking care of the other pillars. Because if a bunch of pillars start cracking or a couple of them crumble, you're going to be in trouble. So it's about looking to the other pillars. So whenever you're in a period in your life where you feel like, oh my God, this piece is just so out of balance, I cannot get the exercise back in. Maybe you have plantar fasciitis, or you've hurt your knee. There's some reason why you can't exercise. Look at the other pillars and just say to yourself, instead of saying like, oh, this, we're really focusing in on what a disaster it is that this one pillar isn't where you want it to be, look at the other ones and say, well, what can I do to shore those up? Because if I keep those strong, I'm going to be okay. And I think this is particularly important in the like early childhood parenting years, because you don't have control over all of your pillars all of the time, but you do have more control than you think. Food is my number one pillar, because it is the one we almost always have control over. I can only think of a few circumstances where we have legit lost control over our food. If we're really ill, that can happen. Or sometimes if we're, traveling and it's completely outside of our control. So we can't make our own food. It's impossible for us. But most of the time we have the ability to strengthen the food pillar. It's almost always there. It's available for women. So look to that pillar. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, oh, I'm so out of balance, I'm a disaster, I'm going to get burnt out, take a breath. The most important thing is that you're becoming aware of it. That's the first step in any positive change. So celebrate that. I know it feels crappy when you realize things aren't exactly the way I want them to be, but it's actually a good thing. And then the second thing I would say is start looking at where you can make positive change. Don't worry about the areas that feel impossible right now. Look for the areas that feel like, okay, there's something I can do there to improve that. And food is probably one of them.
That's so key. I love that. And your point about the asking for help stuff, that it's one of those things, it's so easy to say and so hard to do. I think when it comes to families, and I'm certainly talking about my experience, but I work with a lot of families, it's feeling like you need the help, but we're afraid to ask for help, because does that make us look like we can't do it all? Are we supposed to have this all together? You become a new parent, let's say it's your first child, there's so much learning and growing you're going to do as a human. Like this, you just became a parent and you don't just have a child. So there's just so much growing to do. It's always a work in progress, as you say, but that awareness, the awareness of just feeling like, you know what, this is kind of this day is feeling a little bit difficult, but I know I have good days too. And I think I just need to be more caring to myself this day, because it's a little bit harder, but know that I'm going to have more energy on another day, and maybe that can get done then. So it's so hard to ask for help.
Yeah. What I would say about this asking for help piece is that it's not just about asking for help. It is definitely about asking for help from medical practitioners and experts who might be able to help you with whatever it is you're struggling with. I am a huge advocate of exploring all of the options for support. But it's also about just asking for people in your life to help you. So asking for support from your partner, asking for support from your mother, from your sister, from your friend. I mean, one of the most amazing things that I did when I was the parent of 2 little babies was my neighbor and I used to swap Friday nights. And I would babysit for her one Friday night, and then she would come over and babysit for me the other Friday night. Now, I was not at a point where I wanted to leave my 2 infants with a 14-year-old babysitter. So this gave me comfort. And she had a young baby at the time too. I knew her child. She knew my kids. And that was really, really helpful for me. I knew that every second Friday I had 3 hours to well, actually, do you know what? Every Friday, I had 3 hours to myself because when I babysat for her, her baby was a really good sleeper. So for me, it was a break. Like he would go to bed and I would sit there and, watch movies by myself and like all of these, just have complete peace and quiet, which was not a part of my normal life. And then of course, the next Friday, I would have the opportunity to go out if I wanted to with my husband or whatever. So putting that in place, that little swap was a game changer for me. And, I also asked for help after my daughter was born. I realized I can't physically do this. This is actually more complicated than twins because they are on completely different schedules and they're eating completely different foods. So I was breastfeeding my daughter. My son was still bottle fed. I had, he was napping twice a day. She was napping like 3 times a day. And then when he was napping once a day, she was napping twice a day. Like I realized I'm never going to leave this house. I will never leave this house and I will never stop. There will always be a baby awake. And so I had to bring in some help around that, but I didn't bring in enough help. That's what I realize now. I just didn't ask for enough of what I needed at the time. And I want to say this to the listeners. Nobody is nailing parenthood. Nobody. No one.
Nobody.
And the majority of those people that you see out there on Facebook or Instagram who look like they're nailing it are not nailing it. And if you want a true story of how false social media is, go and follow Highlight Real Recovery, who is my good friend, Emily Lynn Paulson. Go follow her on Instagram. She wrote a book about this very thing. She wrote a book about how she spent years posting on Instagram about how perfect her family she had 5 kids, has 5 kids, how perfect her life was. And in the meantime, she was completely falling apart and ended up getting arrested for DUI. And had to turn her whole life around. And now she dedicates her life to making it clear that that is not what real life is like as a parent, and to dealing with this mummy wine culture thing that we were talking about earlier. But, it's really important for us to understand this. Like nobody's nailing this. And right now in the course of this pandemic, it's like triply true. No one is nailing the pandemic. Everyone is struggling right now. I mean, it's just, burnout rates are on the rise. Women are struggling more. It's really a tough time right now. You're going to have to look long and hard at what the things are that you're filling your day up with. Are they actually making you feel good and bringing you joy, or are they just sapping you of that? Now, the last thing, Ashley, if we have time, that I just wanted to talk about is that joy piece, because I think this is actually, it's a key piece of burnout is that we, as I said, one of the most common signs of burnout is that women start to feel like the glass is half empty instead of half full. And there are some things that I've learned since my burnout that I wish I had known during that time in my life that I think might have changed things drastically for me. And one of them is in relation to a really simple practice called gratitude, which you may or may not have talked about on this podcast before. But for anybody who's listening, if you're feeling like you're where I was 10 years ago, where I was just trying to get through the day and I couldn't wait until my kids went to bed so that I could have a glass of wine. And for you, it might be so you can get on Facebook or Instagram, or so that you can, eat some chips or cookies or whatever the thing is that you do at night that feels like, oh, I finally have some time for me. If you're that person and you're just trying to get through the day, I think this practice of gratitude might change everything for you, because what's happening in those days and what was happening for me for many years is that I was never present in my life. So I was constantly trying to get to the next thing. What's the next thing? Okay, well, with kids, it was like the next stage. Oh, well, soon they'll be potty trained, or soon they'll be eating solids. Soon they'll be down to 2 naps a day instead of 3 naps a day. Soon they'll be walking and we'll be able to do this thing. And depending on what stage of your life you're in, those soon moments are different, right? And then once your kids get older and you're, if you're working or whatever, for the working women that I work with around burnout, it's, when's my next vacation? When's my next promotion? When do I get that bigger house? When am I going to get the whatever? Anyway, my life was kind of an example of, a micro example of that when I had the little kids, and I was just trying to get to the next thing. And so I was always in the future. I was always anticipating what was going to happen next and what that was going to look like, which is largely anxiety, Ashley. So, when we're spending a lot of time worrying about what the next thing is, we're usually feeling anxious. And so in order to help manage some of that anxiety, and again, you might need other support, you might need therapeutic support, you might need medical support around anxiety. I'm not suggesting this is the solution to all of it, but it's a really helpful tool. getting back into the present moment, learning how to be in the moment that you're in, because in the moment that you're in, everything is okay. Right? So one of my favorite questions around this is, what's wrong with now? And asking yourself that question in a moment when you're spinning out and you're freaking out about something, which I'm the master at this. So I'm not judging anyone who freaks out a lot. I used to freak out all the time and I still freak out. But what I ask myself is, what's wrong with now? That will pull me right back to the present moment. And I'll look around and I'll say, okay, everything's okay. And if you're, for example, you got a screaming baby, what's wrong with now? Everything's all right. The baby is screaming. That is highly annoying and exhausting. Something is going on there. I can't figure out what it is, but everything's okay. He's alive and healthy. I'm alive and healthy. I'm in my home. I'm safe. It's all okay. Right? Just pulling yourself back to that present moment can be really, really helpful. Gratitude is a practice that trains your brain to be in the present moment more often. Really quickly, I'll just explain the way to practice gratitude and make it effective. A lot of people practice gratitude and they think that, they need to write 3 things down a day, get a fancy journal. And then at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I got to do this now. Let me check this off my list. What are 3 things that I'm grateful for today? Oh, I know. I'm grateful for my kids, grateful for my house. I'm grateful for my husband, or I'm grateful for my job, or I'm great, my dog, whatever. And they do that for a while. And then they say, like, this did nothing for me. I don't know what the point of this is. And it's not going to do anything for you, because that is not effective gratitude. Gratitude has to be very, very specific and very small to work. So you don't want to be writing down things like, I'm grateful for my job or for my kids, because it's just way too big. What we want it to be is something as small as possible. Like, I'm grateful for the fact that I'm trying to think of something, because I'm actually annoyed with my teenager today. So I'm going to try to think of something I'm grateful for this morning. I am grateful for this. He did come downstairs and he came into the room where I was working and he said, "Good morning, Mama." And he's 17 years old. So I'm grateful for that moment.
Oh, nice.
And those are the types of things that we're talking about with gratitude, really specific little things, right? The fact that, your baby reached out and took your hand is a thing to be grateful for. The fact that, the dog stopped barking, eventually, you could be grateful for that. The fact that today here in Nova Scotia, it's actually going to be, I hear it's going to be like 15 degrees, which is very exciting for me. I have been in anticipatory gratitude for that. I've been in that state now for the last 3 days, and I already have planned this afternoon. I canceled the gym because I'm going to go for a really long walk outside, because I'm so excited about the fact that it's warm. That's the type of gratitude that's actually really helpful. And the reason it's helpful is because in order to be grateful for those types of things, you need to be present. Right? So in order for me to notice that my son said that to me this morning and actually register that as something I'm grateful for, I needed to be in the present moment. If I was off in like, what are we going to have for dinner tonight state, I wouldn't have even heard him say it. Or it just would have been background noise to me. So the purpose of a gratitude practice is to train your brain to get better at being in the present moment. So the more you start looking for and recording these specific things you're grateful for, the better your brain gets at seeing them, which means the better your brain gets at being in the present moment. If you do that for 30 days, so really specific, tiny things that happen during the day that you're grateful for, after 30 days, I think you're going to find that your brain is doing it without you having to prompt it. So you're thinking, like, it was very easy for me to think of something from this morning because I've been doing this now for years. What that means is that, first of all, I'm present in the day more often, which is great. It deals with that whole like escape artist thing. I always say I'm a reformed escape artist. That's what I did for 10 years. It pulls you into the present moment, and that's great because you're actually there. But the other thing that it does is it gives you the opportunity to experience more joy. It actually increases the joy in your day. You get really curious and interested in what today's going to be like for you. How do I make today a great day? As opposed to, how do I make this vacation in 6 months a great vacation, right? It gets you in that moment. And I think if I had had this tool as a young mom, this would have been incredibly powerful for me, because I would have actually stopped to smell the roses more often instead of just trying to race through this thing and get to the next step. If I have any regrets, it's that I didn't just spend more time doing nothing with my children. Just being with my kids and not worrying about like whether we were accomplishing anything or what they looked like, or if they needed a bath, or if the bib was dirty, or if the laundry needed to be doing, just like spending some time with them.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a practical thing because it's so easy for us to look at all the things that are going wrong sometimes. And but if it is easy to do that, that's from the brain being trained to do that and going
Yeah.
down that road. So you can actually make those changes and it
Yeah.
becomes so much easier. I love that.
100%. Always ask yourself, what if it goes right? Not what if it goes wrong?
Mm,
Always. And if you do that, what you do is you're setting up all of your thoughts to run through what I call the faith filter instead of the doubt filter. And when
mhm.
you run your thoughts through the faith filter, you set yourself up for positive action. Like if you're thinking, oh, I think this is going to turn out okay. I think my kids are going to actually turn out okay. I wish I had thought that more instead of being worried about like, oh my gosh, is this going to irreparably damage them? Are they going to, are they going to become sociopaths as a result of the fact that they did this thing? I mean, I had the
Right.
craziest thoughts about my kids. Guess what? They're great kids. They're 16 and 17 and they turned out great. They're not perfect. Nobody is, but they're good kids. And I spent a lot of time worrying off in that future state when I could have just been enjoying all of their quirky, kid traits when they were little. It's also really important to recognize that one of the most impactful ways to close the stress cycle is to have a conversation with someone who cares. So, we're talking about mental health around this. It might feel like to some of the listeners, like some of these things are out of reach in terms of self-care activities. Like I don't have the ability to pay somebody to come in and take my kids so that I can go for a run or I can, do whatever. And I get that, it can be very, very challenging, or for whatever reason, you feel like you can't do these things. I would encourage you to recognize the power of community and connection and work on that, because that in itself can be a huge game changer for women. Just finding somebody to talk to about this stuff, whether it is a friend or a mental health professional, or it's a support group online. I mean, there's so many great support groups out there now, but community is critically important to women. And it is an effective way to pull you out of fight or flight, which is the stress response, and pull you into what's called the relaxation response, which is the second half of stress. And it's pretty much accessible to everybody. And that's why I wanted to raise that, because it's low hanging fruit. It's available, just like gratitude. That's why I love gratitude as a practice. It doesn't cost anything. It takes 2 minutes a day and everybody can do it. So it doesn't need to be fancy. Self-care doesn't need to be fancy. And in fact, usually that's not what you need. You don't need a day at the spa. What you need is, consistent time to yourself where there's quiet, for example. You might just need quiet, a half an hour of quiet a night. How can you negotiate that? Can you say to, let's say your partner, if you have a partner with you and co-parenting, I would like to take a half an hour in the evenings to myself. Could you do the kids' bath so that I can go for a walk, or so that I can go listen to a podcast in my bedroom or read a book or whatever?
Yeah, those little things. I love that. That's perfect.
Looking for more? Check out birthbabysleep.ca, where you'll find new baby resources, prenatal classes, and sleep help during the childhood years. You'll also find me on Facebook and Instagram at birthbabysleep. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember to leave a review or a rating so that others can find us. I'm Ashley Cooley, and we'll see you back here next time.